Olá, sejam bem-vindos a mais uma entrevista Vida Nova. Meu nome é Jonathan Silveira e hoje nós estamos aqui para falarmos um pouquinho sobre uma belíssima obra de ficção, vencedora do prêmio Pulitzer em 2005, e agora foi publicada por Edições Vida Nova. Estou falando da obra Gilead, da autora Marilynne Robinson, que está conosco hoje aqui para falar um pouquinho sobre seu livro. Ela gentilmente aceitou o nosso convite para falar um pouco de Gilead, mas além da nossa autora Marilynne Robinson, nós temos também o privilégio de receber conosco o reverendo Emilio Garofalo, que também é escritor de ficção e um grande admirador do trabalho de Marilynne, que, portanto, fará a condução do nosso bate-papo aqui conosco. Eu gostaria de apresentar os nossos convidados. Eu quero começar apresentando o Emílio. O Emílio Garofalo é ministro presbiteriano e pastor da Igreja Presbiteriana Semear, em Brasília, Distrito Federal. Completou seu PhD no Reformed Theological Seminary, nos Estados Unidos. É professor de Teologia Sistemática no Seminário Presbiteriano de Brasília e autor visitante em Teologia Pastoral no Centro de Pós-Graduação Andrew Jumper, em São Paulo. O Emílio também é autor de diversos livros, tanto teológicos como também de ficção, como eu acabei mencionando aqui. E você pode encontrar os livros dele. Já publicou pela Editora Fiel, pela Editora Thomas Nelson. Você vai encontrar os livros dele. Seja muito bem-vindo, Emílio. É um grande prazer tê-lo aqui com a gente hoje para este bate-papo.
É um prazer estar aqui, uma honra servi-los.
Ok, obrigado. E agora vamos apresentar a nossa autora, a Marilynne Robinson. Marilynne Robinson é autora de Gilead, vencedor do prêmio Pulitzer. Em Casa, vencedor do Orange Prize e do Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Lila, vencedor do National Book Critics Circle Award. E Jack, seu primeiro romance, Housekeeping, ganhou o prêmio PEN Hemingway. Marilynne também escreveu livros de não ficção, dentre eles The Givenness of Things, When I Was a Child I Read Books, Absence of Mind, The Death of Adam e Mother Country. Em 2012, recebeu a Medalha Nacional Presidencial de Humanidades por sua graça e inteligência na escrita. É professora emérita do curso de escritores da Universidade de Iowa. Welcome, Ms. Robinson. Thank you for accepting our invitation to talk about Gilead. It's a great privilege to have you with us today. Your work is an inspiration to me and many other Christians who seek to share the Christian faith with beauty and mystery, especially through the arts. I'm sure that people have their own favorite quotes when reading Gilead, but allow me to share one of my favorites that I think captures very well this sense of beauty and mystery. I feel sometimes as if I were a child who opens its eyes on the world once and sees amazing things it will never know any names for, and then has to close its eyes again. I know this is all mere apparition compared to what awaits us, but it is only lovelier for that. There is a human beauty in it, and I can't believe that when we have all been changed and put on incorruptibility, we will forget our fantastic condition of mortality and impermanence, the great bright dream of procreating and perishing that meant the whole world to us. On eternity, this world will be Troy, I believe, and all that has passed here will be the epic of the universe, the ballad they sing in the streets, because I don't imagine any reality putting this one in the shade entirely, and I think piety forbids me to try. It's a great honor to be hosting this conversation today, Ms. Robinson. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
I would like to bring Emilio in now. He will be leading our conversation. Emilio is a pastor and a fiction author and was the voice for the Brazilian audiobook of Gilead. Needless to say, there's a lot of common interests. So I'll let Emilio take it from here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for your help. And Ms. Robinson, I'm deeply grateful to the Lord for this opportunity. I am an avid reader as well.
Thank you.
Now, let's join in the questions then. And the first one is that I must say, as a pastor myself, we pastors tend to take some pride in thinking that only a pastor truly understands another one. And yet, when I read Gilead, here is a fictional pastor that is true to my heart, that truly gets me. John Ames has become a mentor of sorts to me. And he is incredibly true to the kind of thoughts that go through the minds of pastors. And it made me think how much real-life contact with clergymen or women have you had as a research for the book or as in your life?
Well, oddly enough, I haven't had a great deal. I have belonged to a church in Iowa for decades. And I simply, over the years, I have watched the interactions among, the congregation on one hand and the minister on the other and so on. And you see a lot. I mean, just frankly, the importance a minister has simply quiet integrity, it just builds a massive importance around him and his role or her and her role, And it's a subtle thing. It's a lovely thing that I couldn't help watching closely because it was so lovely to see.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, speaking of it, one issue that Reverend Ames often speaks about is sort of a desire for normalcy. He complains, for example, that sometimes when he approaches people, they change the subject. When he comes near them, they stop the joking, they get serious about it. And it seems to me, would you say that perhaps making pastors more human or more relatable, is it one of your goals with Reverend Ames?
In a sense, yes. I sort of tend to respect, I don't think that, people in the congregation necessarily want to change the subject. It's sort of, it is a kind of respect. It's a way of acknowledging what the minister means for them. And I'm inclined to respect that sort of thing, Yep. He has not chosen another kind of life. Many Protestant ministers are actually the sons of Protestant ministers and so on, going back to Luther, I suppose. And, they know what the role is, they've seen it, they've lived it. And I do think, one of the things that's kind of striking to me is that I'm asked from time to time to preach. Mm-hmm. And I talk all the time, but it embarrasses me. I feel very awkward to speak from a pulpit because I'm not clergy, I for some reason or other, that distinction is important to me, even when it might be said to, inhibit me or work to my disadvantage. So I like the role of clergy. I'm not, I'm more interested in observing it in its, gracious moments than I am in changing it, frankly.
That's great. And your observations tend to be spot on.
Thank you.
If you don't mind me saying, it's amazing. It seems like you really see us as we are. It's lovely. Well, perhaps changing gears a little bit. Here in Brazil, and I believe it's your first time doing an interview for Brazilians, but it seems that many Christians are sadly somewhat suspicious of spending time in fiction, in reading fiction, in dwelling in imaginary worlds. And could you perhaps give a word of encouragement or towards helping Christians in general over here to dwell more deeply into fiction?
Well, one of the great privileges of being human is that we can exist as a community and in deep conversation with one another. you know. You read a book that's written from a perspective that is not yours, and you become somewhat articulate in another kind of thinking than you would have been before, you know. Sometimes I think of the world as just having a great nimbus of human, you know, conversation, human thought around it, you know, that all of us participate in or avoid, and so on. But it's as human as anything we do. You know, I know that people are afraid of, you know, influences that might disturb them, might disturb their thinking and so on. And, you know, they have to be the judge of what they choose to take on. But in general, I think it's a very good thing to embrace the fact of being human at the level of thought and imagination and music and poetry and all the rest. I think that's one of the blessings of our existence, and not to be slighted.
I deeply agree. And it seems that by reading fiction, we are able to dwell in other people's shoes and experience greater enhanced empathy towards the whole range of mankind, which is truly wonderful in God's sight.
Yes.
That's great. Now, another issue that is very heartfelt to me when reading Gilead is the relationship between John Ames and his son. There is a large age gap, of course, between them. But it seems that the way John describes his hopes, his ingrained hopes, his fears, his expectations related to child rearing, it seems to resonate with all parents that have read the book and that I've talked to them about it. And do you think perhaps we ever outlive the fears of parenthood and the hopes that come with it?
Well, I haven't outlived mine yet. You know, I mean, you can't ever, I think, recover from the fact that you brought this person into the world, you know, and perhaps what struggles they have could be traced to a certain extent to the way that you cared for them and so on, or the way that you at this moment even fail to see what would be good to say to them and so on. You know, it's love, you know, it just compounds all the anxieties that come with really deeply wishing the good of another person and yet being humanly incompetent to know always what that would mean, you know, to be adequate to what you might hope of yourself, really.
Yes. And I believe in this last couple of years, every one of us has felt this even stronger with all the political turmoil throughout the world, pandemics and all that. It seems like it's been very hard being parents these days, hasn't it?
Well, my children are parents, so I have passed that on down to the next generation.
just spoil the grandkids now. Let them worry about rearing them.
Right.
Great, that's great. Now, speaking of this wonderful world in which we live in Gilead, Reverend Ames often speaks about his wonder towards creation. There is woven in the story a deep sense of reverence and awe before God's creation. Whether we're talking about the simple plains or the several ways in which light changes the mood of a situation, simple animals and what they go about, the sense that in any given moment, the world can shine like transfiguration, as Ames puts it. I love it that John Ames has eyes to see it. Now, it seems that Christians, sadly so, live in a sense of a dichotomy between they are either heavenly minded or earthly minded. And it seems to me that John Ames shows us that you can better treasure the good things of earth by being heavenly minded, and vice versa. He can better love eternity by loving this world, and vice versa. Would you care comment on that for us?
Well, you know, when I was writing Gilead, in all the writing that I do, really, I'm sort of exploring ideas that were broached to me when I was, you know, reading 19th century American literature and reading Emerson and Thoreau and Melville, and so on. And they're very much influenced by a kind of religious thought that assume that experience addresses everyone, anyone, continuously, so that there is a sort of presence of God in whatever you perceive, whatever, and I think that's a very beautiful idea. And in a way, I sort of experiment in my language with how that might be experienced, frankly, hoping to perhaps school myself. But the idea of perception as being something that is a great gift, that really does root you in an essentially sacred experience, an essentially sacred reality. That's an idea that I feel in all those writers that I admire and that I give John Ames.
Yes, he's very good at it. And if you don't mind me saying it, not only considerations about the beauty of the world itself, but the very beauty of a well-phrased sentence, a memorable paragraph that evokes in the reader's heart this very sense of reverence and awe. A well-put sentence really helps us see what has been in front of us all the time, and yet we had not noticed. So I thank you for that.
True. And that's another reason for reading, certainly a great reason for reading. It really opens the senses if you're reading good writers,
Yes, that's true. Many sentences can become the way our mind translates what we're seeing, and they go with us for years and years. Sometimes we as readers remember sentences we read decades ago, and they bring sense to today's. That's great. Now, speaking of influences, you mentioned some writers that you do enjoy, and Reverend Ames seems to have a special delight in the writings of João Calvino. Is it true for you as well, Mrs. Robinson? Do you delight in Calvin?
It is true. It's funny, he's almost a cartoon figure. People associate him with negativity and darkness and all the rest of it. And so even though I grew up in Presbyterian and then congregational settings and so on, it didn't really occur to me to actually look at him, look at his institutes,
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized that when I'm reading Moby Dick, which is full of theology, of course it would be Calvinist theology, he's really a metaphysical writer. The little issues that are made about him are not, either they're not important or they're not real issues, because, predestination, for example, Thomas Aquinas says, yes, there's predestination. And he uses the same biblical passages that Calvin does to reinforce the thought. So, predestination is a difficult question, but it's everybody's problem. It's not anything Calvin invented. It's a minor thing. What he's talking really about human obligation and human realization and discovery, all these things that we do that change reality for ourselves and change ourselves. He's talking about freedom, and and the gifts that would be liberating to us if we could accept them and all the rest. So I have this sort of rescuer mentality. I think people are not being fair to Calvin. They haven't been. So I made a nice Calvinist minister so they could ponder these questions in a friendlier setting.
But I'm grateful for that. I'm a Calvinist myself, and I agree. He has a bad reputation in some circles. And the very way that John Ames reflects about God's glory in creation, it seems to be Calvinistic in the sense of speaking of creation as a theater of God's glory. Where
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, speaking of literature, you mentioned how Moby Dick is full of theological considerations and all that. How do you think Christianity and literature have encouraged, if you may, one another over the years, encourage or challenge it? Of course, this could be a 1 hour answer, but
Right.
in brief, perhaps.
Yes. Well, it's one of those things where it's really rather difficult to imagine modern literature or, Western literature in the absence of Christianity. And, I think that there were bursts, for example, when the Bible came into English, when it came into vernacular languages. And then the literary qualities of the Bible became obvious, like, the incredible compression and characterization and all these other things that writers are struck by and practice themselves and so on. And then you get the great plays and the great novels and so on, because it's as if scripture opens the possibility of taking everything theologically, taking character, taking familial relationships, taking something that could be accident or could have other meaning than accident and so on, all these kinds of things. It's just like a theological light shines over reality. And people have tended very far away from that in many cases. In many cases, I think they've tended farther away from it in their minds than they have actually on the page, because character and so on always have this aura of significance, or of betrayal or something like that. I think I'm giving you an overgeneral answer, but it seems to me as if it's something that kind of happens at the scale of civilization during the first really important burst.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. Now, one of the main points in Gilead is the adversarial nature of Amos's relationship with Jack. And when he comes into the story and all that changes in Amos's heart and all that takes, was it a main driving element in your portrayal of the dear old Reverend? Perhaps the desire to plot a test of faith for him in his latter days? Would you comment perhaps on some of Jack's presence in the story?
Well, I don't plot books out before I write them. I find the narrative in the course of writing the book,
That's wonderful.
Yeah, well, it's the only way that I can do it. If I try to anticipate what I'm going to do, it falls flat. I have to find it, and Jack originally he makes very sharp, aims very sharply aware that of what he will lose and what he will never realize and so on, because of his age relative to his wife and child. And Jack is there, looking as if he could just step in and take his place, not in any positive sense, but, demographically more or less. But in any case, he's playing baseball with the little boy and all these kinds of things, trying to ingratiate himself. And
he's chatting with Lila. And
yeah, exactly. And, I realized as I wrote that Amos is just very much misinterpreting him. I mean, I knew that, but the ways in which it was important to me, the ways in which Amos misinterpreted so that he would realize the nature of the error, really, of what it, to find out that Jack was not there to take his place, but was there because, in effect, he was in a situation that was very comparable to Ames' own situation. That, and frankly, I have a rule that I love my characters, I don't write about anybody that I can dismiss, and when you create a character like Jack, you create problems for yourself if you're proceeding from that particular aesthetic rule,
Yes.
So finding out what I did about Jack in the course of writing it, I guess sort of was, of one mind with Ames in that.
Yes, we do grow in empathy towards Jack at the same time that John Ames does. We became, as a reader, somewhat suspicious of this guy who's showing up and what is he doing there and what is his plan. But as things progress, we do learn to see better. And I love it. I love the way it's all portrayed. And when it comes to that special moments with the blessing and all that, we feel it as well. And it's wonderful. Thank you for that special moment.
Thank you.
Now, speaking of Jack, I am currently reading Jack. I read Home and I read Lila, and I'm halfway through. I am deeply delighted. And let me tell you, I'm actually taking my sweet time. I don't want to rush it. I don't want it to end. And of course, there is always, the reader's heart, hope for a fifth one. Perhaps The Adventures of John Ames' Son. Of course, I'm joking a little bit, but do you plan to dwell on the Gilead set again? Or
I might. I've been doing some dabbling, just trying things out,
All right. Might is a good enough answer for me now.
Okay.
Cheers up my heart somewhat.
Great.
And of course, after finishing Jack, I'll go back and read the whole thing all together, and it's lovely. Now, as a final question, Ms. Robinson, you've been very kind to us with your time. As a Bible reader, is there a favorite Bible author or a favorite Bible book dear to your heart?
Well, one thing that I'm doing right now is writing a sort of commentary on Genesis. And my publisher has encouraged this and actually gave me an advance that I've already spent, but and so I'm still in the creation narratives, but it seems like whenever I study any book of the Bible, it's my favorite one, but for the moment, I'm very in love with Genesis.
Oh, that's great. So many great stories there. So many fascinating characters.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
The closer you look, the richer it seems.
That's true. Well, I thank you very much for your kind answers and thoughtful replies. And Lord bless you in your time and give you health. And I'm thankful. And I'll call Jonathan back so he can dismiss us in this afternoon.
Right. Thank you.
Wow, what a wonderful and inspirational conversation. Thank you once again, Emilio, for being with us and for your insightful questions. Ms. Robinson, I want to express my gratitude for your work and for producing top-notch literature as a Christian. Unfortunately, we don't see that very often, and I hope that through your life, many Christians in Brazil come to realize that it is possible to be a Christian and engage with the culture, producing good cultural artifacts. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Com isso, então, nós encerramos a nossa entrevista. Nós lembramos que você pode adquirir o livro Gilead, de Marilynne Robinson, no site da editora Vida Nova, vidanova.com.br, e certamente você irá adquiri-lo com um precinho especial. Obrigado a todos que acompanharam a nossa entrevista e até a próxima.